My name is Sara Eaton, and today I'll be presenting on my paper, Style and Secrets, How Narrative Style Allows for Secrecy in Emma and the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Jane Austen's Emma and Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are both classic British novels. Though Austen's story of gossiping English villagers initially seems dissimilar to Stevenson's murderous mystery, both texts hold secrets at their hearts. The current paper will explore the narrative techniques employed in each novel that allow the characters to keep their secrets until the novel's denouements. This essay will also suggest a previously unstudied link between the stories. Their secrets are both withheld and revealed by letters. Emma's third-person narration features free and direct style, which narratologist H. Porter Abbott describes as when the narrator uses a character's tone while sharing their thoughts. Critic Daniel Gunn states that free and direct style assumes, quote, narrative mimicry, unquote, in Austen's novels, meaning the narrator assumes the voices and opinions of Highbury's citizens. The village of Highbury revolves around hearsay, and the narrator, like the town's citizens, shares the bardage without confirmation of its accuracy. As scholars Finch and Bowen state, quote, the very force of free and direct style in Emma is the force of gossip, unquote. Emma's thoughts are often stated as though from the narrator, which grants authority to her ideas. However, Emma's thoughts are tainted with Highbury's gossip, meaning passages of free and direct style morph into and out of unbiased narration. A source of gossip is Jane Fairfax's return to Highbury. Jane lived in Highbury with her aunt, Miss Bates, from the time she was orphaned until her adolescent years. She then lived with her father's friend, Colonel Campbell, while he sponsored her education. Miss Bates explains Jane was meant to accompany the Campbells and their son-in-law, Mr. Dixon, to Ireland, but recently fell ill. Miss Bates ends her story by sharing her fondness for Mr. Dixon after he once saved Jane from falling overboard. While Miss Bates intends to entertain Emma, this information causes, quote, an animating suspicion to enter Emma's brain, unquote. Without narrative authority, Emma decides Jane loves Mr. Dixon. In the next chapter, the lines between truth and gossip become more blurred as the narrator assumes Emma's tone and opinions. The narrator says that while Miss Bates's gossip wasn't untruthful, there, quote, might be some truth not told, unquote. With this phrase, a phrase marked with narrative authority in the background, Emma speculates that Jane has refused to travel to Ireland because she feels guilty for falling in love with Colonel Campbell's son-in-law after the Campbells generously raised her. When a pianoforte arrives for Jane, the narrator assumes Miss Bates's tone while saying the piano must be from Colonel Campbell. The pianoforte has no letter revealing its donor, though, and Emma believes Dixon to be the secret sender. This belief affects Emma's interpretations of Jane's behavior. The narrator says Emma's thoughts, quote, the blush of consciousness from Jane with which congratulations were received, the blush of guilt which accompanied the name of my excellent friend Colonel Campbell, unquote. Here, Emma's thoughts are given narrative authority. Even more gossip-inducing than Jane's return to Highbury is Frank Churchill's. After his mother's early death, Frank was raised by his aunt and uncle, but he's visiting Highbury to celebrate his father's remarriage. The situation between Jane and Mr. Dixon becomes more convoluted by Frank's dialogue and actions. When Emma shares her theory that Dixon gifted the pianoforte, Frank agrees wholeheartedly and proceeds to tease Jane about the piano's origins. Emma asks Frank to cease, as she was only speculating about Jane and Dixon, but the narrative says, quote, he, Frank, shook his head with a smile and looked as if he had very little doubt and very little mercy, unquote. Here, the narrator lends authority to the idea that Frank expects the pianoforte was sent by Dixon. Frank's dialogue, mockery of Jane, and the narrator's suppositions about Frank's beliefs causes the reader to never suspect Jane and Frank to be more than courteous neighbors. In reality, not only were Frank and Jane engaged to be married during the pianoforte fiasco, but Frank was the piano's covert conferrer. Multiple narrative choices mislead the reader, but the most influential is Austen's use of free and direct style throughout Emma. The narrator shares both gossip and fact in the same way and often in the same breath, which disorients and distracts the reader from the real romance subplot that underlines the novel. Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde also uses third-person narration. But while Emma's omniscient narrator imitates characters' voices, there is distance between the narrator and characters in Stevenson's novella. As H. Porter Abbott observes, since distance refers to how close a narrator is to the story's characters, distance is also tied to reliability. While less distance means a character can provide more details on plot events, it also lends bias to the narrative. Stevenson's tale features a narrator who is both closely tied to the story and kept from its secrets. The narrator knows intimate details of the characters' demeanors while in public, but knows nothing of their private lives. Dr. Jekyll, Utterson, and Lanyon first become friends when Jekyll introduced Utterson, his lawyer, to Lanyon, his work colleague. The three men are friends, yet they speak of work at dinner parties, not their personal lives. One critic suggests the men attend most social events because they are part of, quote, middle class rituals, unquote. The men do not dine together out of friendship. They sit in one another's company to fulfill societal expectations, and as such, they do not truly know one another. This distance between narrator and story, as well as between friend and friend, helps hide the truth. The narrator almost seems to be each man taking turns describing his friend, or a ghostly presence following Utterson through his life and accompanying him to dinner parties. The secret that Jekyll transforms into Hyde is concealed, because the limited narrator only knows what Utterson knows. Catherine Frank explains how characters, in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, only become their true selves behind closed doors, as Jekyll's experiments and most of his transformations into Hyde occur within his laboratory. Frank believes the ability to be one's truest self and the right to privacy within one's home are linked. She says, examining the possibility for and limits on the protection of disclosures about the self, speech, and situating these disclosures in specific locales, space, this novella links property and privacy with personality. Privacy laws allow Jekyll and Hyde to stop guarding their secret both in action, they do not have to pretend to be different people, and in words, they are free to speak or write their truth. While Emma and the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde seem unrelated at first glance, both novels are told in the third person and contain characters who are concealing information. Perhaps the greatest similarity between the texts, however, is that both novels conceal and reveal their secrets through letters. Letters have long been recognized for their ability to reveal personal truths. Amy Maupin, an English educator, describes how letters show a more personal side to their authors, stating, when one studies a letter, one sees inside the life and the mind of a specific person. Unlike a fictional character created in the imagination of an author, a letter writer reveals his or her own identity, unquote. What Maupin fails to consider here is whether fictional letters can reveal as much about a character as actual letters can about real individuals. As Maupin states at the end of her article while discussing epistolary novels, quote, letters do not detract from the storyline and they enrich character development, unquote. Emma, in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, illustrate that letters can develop characters and the plot by exposing a character's most personal self. In Emma, Jane Fairfax is chided by her neighbor, Mrs. Elton, for going to the post office in the rain. Jane is often timid concerning Mrs. Elton, but she refuses to forego her daily trips to the post office. She admits her letters are personal, not professional, and Emma's mind returns to romance. She believes Jane to be glowing with the joy of a letter from a certain Mr. Dixon in Ireland. However, the reader never sees the correspondence, and Jane offers no details on its sender. If she had, the reader would have learned that Jane and Frank were sending each other letters. The romance was concealed from Highbury's verbal gossip because it was exchanged through private letters between lovers. Just as Jane and Frank's letters hid their romance, however, Frank tells his family of his relationship through a letter. Frank mails a message to his stepmother that reveals his secret engagement to Jane and explains the couple's deceptive behavior. While Jane's letters were mentioned but not read, conserving their secrets, Frank's full letter is included in the novel's text, and the reader learns the truth along with Highbury's residents. The same formula occurs in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The first half of the novel is filled with mysterious written documents that either refuse to reveal the whole truth or contain the truth but cannot be opened. When the police and Utterson go to Hyde's house to investigate the murder of Sir Danvers Carew, one of Utterson's clients, they find the ashes of burned papers that would have illuminated the relationship between Jekyll and Hyde. When something sinister transpires between Lanyon and Jekyll, Lanyon narrates events in a letter Utterson can only open once Lanyon and Jekyll have died. Eventually, though, the truth comes out when Utterson and Poole, Jekyll's butler, enter Jekyll's laboratory. This break-in leads to answers through an envelope found on Hyde's body. The envelope, addressed to Utterson, says Jekyll has, quote, disappeared, unquote, forever, and contains a letter detailing Jekyll's experiments and transformations. Jekyll's death also allows Utterson to read Lanyon's note, which connects Jekyll and Hyde and describes the night Lanyon and Utterson swore off friendship. Just as in Emma, the same secrets hidden by letters throughout the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's beginning are explained through letters at the story's close. As one scholar argues, as more subjects and transactions find the recognizable way into the letter, the genre itself expands and specializes so that distinctive kinds of letters become recognizable and treated differently. Repeated letters within Austen and Stevenson's stories cause the reader to realize that these fictional epistles are meant to either hint at secrets or reveal them. Emma and the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde both contain secrets. Emma utilizes free indirect style to keep the reader from learning that Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill have been engaged for the novel's entirety. The narrator shares truth and Emma's own beliefs indiscriminatively, which lends narrative authority to incorrect conclusions and conceals the romance. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde uses third-person limited narration to restrict the main focalizer's knowledge, which prevents Utterson and the reader from realizing Jekyll and Hyde are two facets of the same person. While these novels maintain secrets in these individual ways, they also conceal information through letters. Letters in the first half of the novels contain answers to the story's mysteries, but these letters are kept from the unenlightened parties. At the end of each novel, however, letters disclose the genuine situations. Studying Emma and the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde together allows us to realize that despite contrasting genres and plots, the novels employ similar narrative techniques.